Welcome to Studio Chat, an entertainment talk show covering movies, TV, music, and more. Chelsea here with a special guest who's an Emmy Award-winning producer and director of daytime television, soap operas, and most recently, documentary. Mary O'Leary, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Chelsea. Delighted to be here.
Thanks so much. As am I. I'm very excited to talk to you about a lot of your career has been so fascinating and so many questions on my mind. But I'd like to start with your most recent venture, the award-winning documentary Dark Shadows and Beyond, the Jonathan Frid Story. This was a brilliant production and piece of storytelling, both for Dark Shadows fans and even for those who have never heard of the show or Jonathan Frid's other work. And it came out in 2021. So my question is, what made that the right time to put together this production and tell Jonathan's story?
Well, I was very fortunate that I was approached by a distributor. In most cases, filmmakers are searching to get distribution for their product. In my case, I was approached. They had a budget, not necessarily a very large one, but they had a budget and said that they were interested in a documentary on Jonathan Frid. And as I had a business relationship and friendship with Jonathan for many years, I was the logical candidate. And I was delighted to attack the project. I had never done a documentary before. As you mentioned, my career has been in daytime soap opera as a producer. But as a producer in daytime soap operas, I've learned a lot about storytelling and telling a story with heart. And as I began the project, I knew that there was a very important story to tell about Jonathan, which was not only the kind of person he was, but his love for being a performer on the live stage. So once I had that idea in my head, I began, of course, a tremendous amount of research. He is a Canadian. He always stayed a Canadian citizen, even though he lived in New York City for 40 years. So it was research, reaching out to his family, actors who he worked with, setting up interviews, writing the questions, getting cameramen in different cities that I traveled to. Quite an undertaking, but I just had a wonderful time. I think I would really describe it as my passion project.
Wow, that's wonderful. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of steps involved, obviously, with something like that, because you have to take your own knowledge, add to it with, all the research of getting everybody together and, doing these other interviews. And in a way, it's a lot like journalism to create a documentary, because you're digging into the stories that you don't know and finding out the answers, and, then assembling it to put together the story makes it almost in the sense of, a narrative filmmaking as well, because then you're taking all these bits and pieces of his life and elements that you've put together and just making them into a streamlined story for everyone to see his life essentially from start to finish, in a sense.
Right. And since Jonathan had passed away in 2012 and I began my project in 2019, I didn't have him there to ask questions. So I did go back through a number of interviews, particularly when he was on tour in the 1980s with Arsenic and Old Lace, which had been on Broadway, and then they did a national tour. He had a number of interviews during that period of time. And so it was finding selections where he could also be telling the story of his life, as well as, of course, people that knew him and worked with him, including people like Dick Cavett, who had a talk show, but they had also known each other at Yale, Marion Ross, who worked with him in the Arsenic and Old Lace production, Christina Pickles, who had played his wife in the movie Seizure, which was the first Oliver Stone film. So it was, as we said, it was just finding people, figuring out how to tell his story through through the people that I interviewed.
Definitely. And very well done. It was well put together and very, like I said, it was a narrative in a sense, a documentary all in one. And speaking of the interviews, I love that those were incorporated in there, because it was, in a sense, getting him to tell his story, even though he can't be here in person to do so. But a moment that I found to be such a great, almost comedic moment in documentary was when you had the interview, a feature of pre-Dark Shadows Jonathan saying that he didn't think TV would be the place for him and that he'd find more success in theater than commercial TV. And it just goes to show you that you never know where life's going to take you, especially in entertainment.
Oh, yes. The role of Barnabas Collins on Dark Shadows was a big surprise for him. And in fact, when he was contacted via phone by his agent to go for the audition, he had just returned. He'd been on a national tour with actor Ray Milland in the production of Hostile Witness, and he was just returning to his apartment in Manhattan, barely putting down his bags. The phone was ringing. And he said to his agent on the phone, well, I think I'm really, for a lot of years, he'd been thinking about teaching acting. And he said, I think I'm going to go look for a university acting professor job in San Diego or somewhere in Southern California. And the agent said, well, look, this part, it's only 13 weeks. You can get a little money in your pocket and then you can move to the West Coast. So Jonathan went for the audition, and it actually turned to be, it actually was really more of an interview. And yeah, get the call from the agent, he's got the job. So, you know, he used to joke about sometimes when you really, really care so intensely and you go into an audition, then you don't get the role. And in this case, he was pretty laissez-faire about it and he went in and got the part. And of course, what happened is the show had been struggling in the ratings, and Dan Curtis, the executive producer, creator of Dark Shadows, decided to go full-fledged supernatural. They'd done a little bit supernatural, a ghost and a character of a phoenix. And he decided, let's go for the vampire and see what happens, because this may be the end of the show. Well, the vampire, huge popularity. And they, of course, then said, Jonathan, you're not leaving. You're going to be staying. And he was on the show for 4 years, which was the remainder of the run of Dark Shadows.
Oh yeah, that's wonderful. And it's definitely so interesting. Like you said, some actors go into auditions so intensely, like you're really focused on a role, it's a dream role or something like that. And then he was just kind of like, sure, let's just go to this job interview, see what happens, right? And ends up being like one of the biggest things of his career. It's so funny.
And a couple of fans have commented, because also in the documentary, via using letters that Jonathan wrote to his parents, which fortunately were saved over the years. And I had actor Ian Buchanan, who's done a number of soap operas and also Nighttime, he did Twin Peaks. He narrated some of the letters for me. And in one of those letters, Jonathan is all excited about a particular Broadway play he's auditioning for, feels he did like the best audition of his life, gets a call back and feels like, oh, I don't think I'm going to get this. And the role, he does lose out to actor Louis Edmonds, who ended up being one of his co-stars on Dark Shadows. So several fans have commented on my social media that that was such a surprise for them, and they loved that little piece of the story of the documentary.
Exactly. I mean, that's another thing of just a sense of a synchronicity almost, of just connection throughout the entertainment world, that, you know, he lost a role to this particular person with Louis Edmond, but then ends up working with him so closely and for so long with the rest of Dark Shadows there. It's a really funny connection. And Dark Shadows had and still has such a strong fan base. And it's interesting also, featured in the documentary, is how, even though it had such mature subjects coming up sometimes, it's interesting how it was mainly a younger audience. And one other part that I found really fascinating is how impactful the fan feedback and reactions could be to the actual production of the show. Because there was a moment where the time slot of Dark Shadows changed to earlier in the day, and then young fans wouldn't be home from school in time to see it. So they bombarded the studio with letters and got it changed back. So just the fact that the fans loved the show so much and the production understood that and listened, I just love that personal connection it brought to people.
Yes, it was really unusual for young people to watch soap operas back when it was on, which was 1966 to 1971. And they would flock to the studio after school and wait for the actors to come out, to meet them, to get their autographs. And they, many of them would write fan letters to Jonathan saying, I run home from school to watch Dark Shadows. And he joked, he said, well, I guess I kept the youth of America fit, because they didn't walk, they ran home from school. But it had a huge appeal. And people do ask me, like, what is it that the show, which went off the air in 1971, is still on today, more than 55 years later? It is seen on streaming services. It was first into syndication in the late 70s. It was internationally in South America, and then it was on public television station in the 80s. It was on the Sci-Fi Channel in the 90s, and then today it's streaming. You can pretty much find episodes of Dark Shadows many different places after all these years. Fans have discussed on social media platforms, so what is it? And a big part of it, of course, was the writing, the stories. It was classic Gothic romance, Gothic horror. And we all just loved those stories. And Dark Shadows took classics such as Dracula, Frankenstein, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, The Turn of the Screw, and then took their characters and told those stories. And I think that's what really pulls people in. Particularly, I love when the show starts, it's in black and white. And there is something that really makes me look at classic movies. Oh, it's because it's in black and white, and it is the gothic spookiness. So I think that's a great appeal. And also, the show being at that time recorded in New York used a lot of actors who'd been on Broadway. They that brought an incredible performances. They completely believe the script. I mean, some people today look at the old episodes and think it's campy, but it was taken very seriously by all the actors. And again, you have to remember it was shot the late 60s. We have television has changed enormously since then. And at the time, the actors were told not to stop. It was too expensive to edit. So they had to keep going. If something shook, a crew person started to come into the frame, the boom started, a microphone started to come into frame. They were told, never stop, keep going. And there's actually a funny story. Jonathan told me they were taping the show, and he was in a scene with Alexander Moltke, who played Victoria Winters. And they were in the foyer of the main set, which was Collinwood, was the house that was referred to as the Collins family estate. And they were in the foyer. The doors were closed to the main living room area. And what had happened was something caught on fire, because they often used candles, fires in the fireplace. And he's doing the scene. They are hearing the noise of the fire extinguisher and some voices trying to put it out, but they kept going. And they thought, I guess if there's a fire, they'll tell us to stop so we can escape. But they kept going, and they never cut the scene. And if you actually watch that episode, you can hear the noise offset that they were hearing.
Goodness.
But that's why today, of course, it does have an aspect of mistakes, and it's dated in that sense. But again, the stories hold up, the performances do. And I think those are two elements that really have kept the show going after all these years. And as you've mentioned, pulling in even young people today. I mean, one of the nice reviews I got on my documentary, the gentleman had said that his daughter didn't know the show. He was somewhat familiar with it. And she was, I think he said 17 or 18. And she loved the documentary and said, now I want to watch Dark Shadows. So that was very, very nice to read that.
Perfect. No, that's the goal as well. Not only for people who know and understand Dark Shadows, Jonathan's work, to really get a more in-depth look into his life, but also for, like I said, for people who have never heard of it. I agree. I think it's wonderful to immerse them into that world, because I had seen much of Dark Shadows, almost the full series, when I was watching this documentary, but then I'm like, I need to rewatch it. I need to go back and, notice all these details and, understand it from a different perspective. But I think the word for it I would use is theatrical, in a sense. I agree that, some people may be like, oh, it's a little hokey, a little dated and something like that, but that's not really the word for it. I think it's theatrical, because not only is it that having those Broadway actors, having those Shakespearean actors, such as, Jonathan and Lewis and everything, having that added element of that Gothic genre. I think I agree with you in that sense. It's that Gothic genre has that elevated sense of drama, that theatricality. You can be more over the top, because these are not everyday stories we're talking about. These are, vampires and werewolves and all kinds of things. But at the same time, that's what was brilliant about Dark Shadows, is it brought these characters and humanized them in that sense as well, just as the classic monster movies, the Universal Pictures did the same kind of thing. It's Frankenstein, the monster, but then you see the human qualities that exist behind that, and the layers. And that's why I think it's good, because it's not just campy, ooh, vampires scary. It's real storylines and emotions and things that they bring to another level.
Yes, it absolutely larger than life, because these characters were, I mean, the undead characters, you could really could say they're not your average human coming in the door. And this was what many people talk about with Jonathan's portrayal. Jonathan's portrayal of the vampire was not a la Bela Lugosi, I'm a creature and I come in and I am ready to attack you. He actually, with the help of the writers, because of course, if it's not on the page, the actor can't play it, worked together to humanize the monster. So the vampire was vulnerable. He was tormented. He didn't want to be a vampire. And the show actually went back into the past, 1795, to tell the story of how did Barnabas become a vampire, he was cursed by a witch. And it was really the multi-layered character, that portrayal, that brought audiences, and today, everything that came later, the Twilight, Vampire Diaries, all of them with a sympathetic vampire, owe it to the beginning with Dark Shadows and Jonathan's portrayal of Barnabas. And as he said, women who watched the show, they wanted to mother him, take care of him. And then, of course, there were those that wanted to get a bite on their necks. But it really was. That's also too a huge part of why all these years later it's still here and watched, because it was such an amazing shift in what we expected the monster to be, to see him as a person who he could be kind and he loved his little sister, but then he also had to survive. Jonathan would often describe too as like an alcoholic. I need that drink. Well, he was someone who needed blood to survive, and he really didn't want to bite that woman on the neck, but he had to survive, because I think we all have that sense of survival, and that's what he had to do, even though he didn't want to.
Definitely, yeah, and it creates that conflict, and just makes the character more complex. But I think daytime television soap operas, I mean, since their start and right up to the shows that you've produced, like The Guiding Light, Another World, General Hospital, I mean, they have always become a part of people's lives because of this daily format, really. They're the type of shows where whole families feel connected, like they know the characters and care about what happens for them. They wait for the story to continue every day, or wait over the weekend to see what happens on Monday, kind of thing. I mean, did you personally feel that sort of fan connection while producing the shows that you did?
Well, I remember some stories. There was an actress when I was on Guiding Light. It was the start of her career, Michelle Forbes. She's been on a number of series since then. Probably a lot of people know from Next Generation, she was Ro. But she was playing a character who came into town, and the super love couple at the time, Reva and Josh, she was breaking them up. So of course viewers were, how dare she, right? So she told me a story one afternoon, tired, had a long day of work, and she was going to buy herself a pair of shoes. She went into the shoe store. She's looking, and she hears a harsh voice behind her. What are you doing? And she turns and says, buying shoes. And the woman says, no, to Reva and Josh. And so she couldn't believe Span was accosting her because of the TV characters and not, anything she was doing. So that you've actually described it exactly right. That coming into the home every day, I think the viewers really begin to feel comfortable in that. Like, I know these people, they're my friend. And there is that line of sort of forgetting, yes, but these are actors playing a role, but they feel a comfort level, I think, to approach them, and when they see them, freely talk to them, write to them. That Jonathan, who got tremendous amounts of fan mail back in the day, 5,000 or something a week. And he said sometimes people would write as if he were Barnabas, but then there were also lovely letters complimenting his performance. So I think talking to the other actors, I mean, I myself, I'm not recognized. I was in production, so I didn't have people coming up to me. I certainly, if I talked about what I was doing, people would be very interested. And if they knew the soap opera I was on at the time, would sometimes ask story questions. And if it was advanced, I can't tell you what's coming up, only what's been on already. I really enjoyed it. I had a wonderful time. I was very fortunate. I worked on 5 daytime soap operas, starting with Guiding Light, Another World, One Life to Live, General Hospital, and Young and the Restless. So it was a great career, wonderful years working on the shows.
Absolutely. No, that's wonderful. And I think another thing that connects the theater world that you discuss with Jonathan's documentary and daytime television is the immediacy of it. Theater is instant feedback from the audience, and daytime TV is almost immediate, maybe shortly after it airs, kind of thing. And for Dark Shadows, for example, like you were saying, a lot of things were just one take, one shot, and there was very little rehearsal, much of it right before the shoot. Was it still similar that way for daytime television when you were producing more recently?
When I started work in daytime television, it was a little easier for the actors because we could stop. Or we, as a producer in the booth, might stop because we saw something go wrong, technically, like the microphone coming into the shot. So having that freedom was a little bit of a wonderful thing for the actors. They did still have to know their lines. I mean, Jonathan's day, there were teleprompters. When I started working, there weren't teleprompters. The actors had to know their lines. But again, that's the case if they went up on a line, okay, we could stop. And sometimes you don't do the whole scene again. You do what's called a pickup. So you're starting up again in the middle of the scene. But it is still, I mean, the actors have to come in having made their choices of how they're going to play the scene. And then when they arrive in the morning, they meet with the director. The show is not shot in sequence. Basically, it's usually set by set. So actors are also doing things not necessarily in the order of what they happen. And also, you might be doing scenes today that really were that really are for an episode in 2 days. It's out of sequence, much like films are out of sequence. So the actor has to sort of keep in her head or his head, all right, this is where I'm coming from, or, oh no, I didn't tape that scene yet, but I do, so I have to play this as if I don't know. So there's a tremendous amount of work the actors do, and I have felt sometimes that people poo-poo soap operas, or, oh, you've only done soap operas, but it takes a tremendous amount of skill and memorization, training to be able to come in and hit the floor running. Let's get this done. And certainly there's somewhat more rehearsal than Jonathan's time, but still not enough really to get a day done.
Definitely. Yeah. With that daily expectation there, it's, there could never be enough rehearsal to get it in. But I mean, that's the thing. There's so much work involved in any kind of production, from behind the camera, in front of the camera, on the sides of the camera. I mean, there's somebody doing something at all times. And I agree. I think it's really important to recognize that level of work, especially at a time like today, literally when SAG-AFTRA is on strike because they're talking about AIs, replacing people. I mean, this is, really, really critical time right now for the entertainment industry. And I think it's definitely just important to acknowledge how much work and how many human hands are needed to make a truly good production. And especially for the soap operas, like you said, some people may throw it aside as like, oh, it's just, campy storytelling or whatever, the case may be, but it's still on the level of film production, like you said, out of sequence, knowing the history, knowing what the characters did before, what they're doing next, and then also adding the layer of the personal human connection where people are connected to these characters and want to know what happens to them. I mean, this human element can't go away when it comes to entertainment.
Right. Yes, and in terms of production, I mean, everybody puts their heart and soul into it, whether it's the lighting designer, the set designer, the costume designer, and meticulous in terms of wardrobe. Again, with shooting out of sequence, make sure they're in the right costume for this day of the scene. Everybody is on their toes, giving 100% every single day, because soap operas, again, very unusual from most television programming, is year round, which was wonderful for me to be working year round, as opposed to, okay, season ends, look for another job. Which certainly is true, especially theater actors, and you never know where your next job's coming from. So it is a difficult time. And first of all, again, the writers on strike. You can't tell the story without good writing. You need the writers. An actor, Jonathan has always said this. He said, it's not my job to say I have a problem with the script. I do what the script asks me to do. That's the creation of the writers. And I don't want to see AI actors. I want to see real life and blood actors. I mean, I understand that was one of the issues, is they said there are actors who work in the background. I've always said background actors, but they're called extras as well. They come in, and I know as a producer, each day I would go and greet them and just tell them a little bit about what was going to shoot that day, because generally they didn't have the script, and told them that they feel free to react as they would in a regular situation. If you're in a coffee shop and someone has a fight, you turn and look. So again, they were there to work and be serious. And one of the issues I understand with AI is they want to, well, let's shoot that person on the first day and just use video for the background all the other days. So it's like, well, but then that's not fair to that actor. You're going to use his image and not pay him. So and unfortunately, they couldn't come to terms, and there's a strike, and I hope it ends soon. I've seen, I live near studios, and I drive by, and you see them outside, and 2 months now for the writers, and actors just starting. But I hope they get to the table and resolve it soon.
Absolutely, I agree. I mean, I failed to mention the writers' strike, of course, as well. I just mentioned the actors one because it literally just officially became, the strike today. But the writers, of course, have been working on this for 2 months as well, and the writers are literally everything that it's true. The actors bring to life the script and maybe occasionally make suggestions and add things to it from their own personal experiences or their perspective of the character. But at the end of the day, it is the writers that are creating these storylines and creating these characters that people connect with and feel like they know and want to see every day.
And as a matter of fact, you remind me of one of my favorite moments in the documentary is actor Anthony Zerbe, who has worked both on Broadway, regional theater, and many, many television series and movies. Talked just so beautifully about theater, and he too actually said, "Yes, the writer has it on the page, but the actor brings it to life." And it's just beautiful. I mean, I enjoyed all the people I interviewed for different reasons, but he was a particular favorite. I remember Marion Ross was so helpful. She was the first one that I interviewed, and Marion, about 90 years old, I had met with her, and she was going to have a makeup, and I said, "Well, let me tell you the questions I'm going to ask you." And she said, "No, dear, please don't. Because then when we get on camera, I'll be confused and think you already asked, and I think that you asked me already." Oh gosh, that was so helpful because many of the people I did interview were of a more mature age, and I that's what I was really a real helpful note as a new documentary producer to learn that.
That makes a lot of sense, and it also gets a genuine on the spot answer from anyone you interviewed as
Right.
well. Just that again to coming back to the immediacy. You ask the question, their first thought, their first memory they have of a specific event or person. It just that's what comes out, and that adds to the authenticity of a documentary as well.
Right. Yes, exactly.
So, how did you first find your way to producing daytime television? And also, what was it about producing specifically, as opposed to acting or directing or another element of it, that drew you to the production?
I think when young people consider a career in entertainment, you do to look towards acting as the first thing you see. So certainly, I would say in high school, I did a little bit of acting, but by college, I realized there's so many more positions backstage, and I'm more comfortable with that. I certainly didn't feel I find it easy to be on stage. So I at college worked on a lot of production. I did a little acting, but I mostly worked backstage and learned, well, what does a designer do? What does a stage manager do? What does a producer do? And in as much as my parents wanted me to go teach drama, say at a high school, I completed all my courses and moved to New York City to work in the theater. And I was focused on stage management. It requires a lot of organization, being able to communicate to people, be level-headed. So that was my first goal, and I was doing some work, but of course it's any big city, New York City, LA is an expensive place to live, so had survival jobs as well. And then I did a play that was off Broadway, and then moved to off Broadway, which is super exciting. But unfortunately, the reviews were horrible, and the play closed. And it had opened June 2nd, closed, June 8th. And I had turned down summer stock work. And I thought, oh gosh, here's a situation where you take a risk. It didn't work out. I don't have work for the summer, and I could have. So I began to look towards television for more sort of financial security. And in New York City, which is where I was at the time, there were soap operas being shot. Now they're all in Los Angeles. But at the time, there were at least half of them were done in New York City. And I said, "Oh, that could be really." I watched some, including Dark Shadows, when I was growing up. And I said, "That offers security. It's year round." So, and I sometimes speak to college students. Actually, enjoy lecturing about the industry. And it's quite different today. I tell the students that back in the day, you could call a receptionist at the desk, and you're talking to someone, and you can find out, can I check, is this the name of the producer? Is the producer going to be in the next few weeks? Just get some information. And then I wrote a cover letter and resume, and then I would call and say, yes, I'd like to speak to the producer. In one case, it was kind of interesting. It was One Life to Live, years before I worked there. And the receptionist put me through right away to the producer, which is unusual. Usually it would take sometimes a little effort to get them to transfer the call, because there was a Mary O'Leary who worked at ABC TV in production scheduling, and the producer thought it was that Mary O'Leary. But now she had me on the phone. We talked, and I said, I sent my resume. I'm very interested in the show, and ended up going. She said, okay, come in, we'll have an interview, in which I was also taken to the set. So at that time, I didn't get hired there, but that was an interesting, sort of a funny thing that happened. But it was really being persistent. And eventually I got hired in the production office at Guiding Light. And again, in those days, literally we still had electric typewriters. Computers were just about to come in there in the late 80s. And it was, you do a good job, you get noticed, you keep working. So I started in production office. I became assistant to the producers, associate producer, eventually producer, just willing to learn and always be there. Oh, there's a location shoot, I'd like to go, I'd like to be there. Giving it your all. And this is true also interns, because we would have a number of interns usually in the summer. And there were some that would just sit and watch, but it was those that would come and say, hey, can I ask you questions? Such as this question, like, how did you get your job? What do you recommend? If you show that extra enthusiasm, energy, you're going to be noticed. And we would hire when an opening occurred. We'd look back, okay, who were the interns that really shined? Okay, let's see if that person's available to get hired for a production office job. So I've always said to people, just work hard, get along with people. There's nothing wrong in writing letters. I think writing letters is a wonderful thing. I know everybody today's email. I think it's always nice to get a hard copy in the mail, a thank you letter after an internship or working on a limited project. It stands out. People notice it. And ultimately, as I say in the documentary, I wrote Jonathan a letter. Understood he was going to try to produce a one-man show, and did he need any help? I was working on Guiding Light at the time, but I had weekends. So I didn't know if he'd even call me. I might throw the letter away. Well, he called, and we became business partners in his theater company. So you never know where it could land, but just be ready and do your best. That's all I can tell people. I mean, yes, there's many, many more students today. When I was in college, the department major was theater communications. Across the country, I've noticed, speaking to people, there's more now theater, television, film, or television and film, or dance, television, and film, and not theater has become secondary in a lot of places, not all, but or they just added to it. So there are certainly many, many students that are coming to Los Angeles looking for work. Again, try to get internships, even when you're a freshman. Many places look towards juniors or seniors, but why not apply when you're a freshman? Try to get an internship at even locally. I've spoken to a group of students. They were in LA, but they were from Tennessee. And I said, there's filming going on there. Try to get to those sets, meet people, see if you can get an internship. North Carolina, they do a lot of shooting. Certainly Atlanta has, I think, 4 major studios there now. So it doesn't have to be, oh, I better look for an internship in LA. Try to look for where you are, or a neighboring state. It takes effort. The Television Academy, which handles the Emmy Awards, they have an internship program. And I'm actually have over the years been one of the people who have read the applications to help choose the students for the summer, because again, stiff competition. They have about 50 spots, and I think last year 1,700 students applied. But wow. again, take a shot. Just don't sit there. Go ahead, try. Yes, that's what I always say.
Absolutely. And it worked for you, like you said, with the Jonathan situation, and it definitely works for a lot of people. I agree about the programs expanding nowadays. They add layers onto theater. There are very few theater only programs, but I think it's probably because nowadays they have the same idea that you had, like you said, living in New York City, where the theater, kind of had to supplement it financially or find a way to support it at the same time with television. I think a lot of programs probably are just geared towards that to begin with. Well, you could do theater or television or film, or maybe all of them, or maybe, some combination. I think that's probably what they're going for with that type of program.
Yes, because I think it's pretty rare that an actor could make a living only doing theater. I mean, certainly there are places, London, Royal Shakespeare Company, Stratford up in Canada, Ontario, Canada, they have full seasons. But I think for the most part, an actor will need commercials to help with pay the bills, or TV or film. So it's really being well-rounded. I mean, and as well with theater, well-rounded, you might have to be able to sing in musicals or dance. So you're really constantly learning. I remember one time years ago, an actor I knew came to New York, and he had good training, but he was waiting for the phone to ring, basically. It was like, get out there. If you're not working, be taking a class, be figuring out, you might have to survival job because you got to figure out how to pay your bills and a budget. Don't move to New York with nothing in the bank. You need to have something in the bank. You've got to constantly be doing something to improve. Read plays. Oh, is that a part that could suit me? You can't just sit and hope and wait. You really have to be constantly working, meeting people, linking in. Of course, that's very important today, being a part of that. It's work to get work.
Definitely. Coming back to your perspective and your part of your career as a producer, for those who don't know the nuances of the production world too well, you've been pretty much, you listed all the roles before: a producer, a coordinating producer, an associate, an assistant, an executive producer as well. What distinguishes these roles on a set, and is there ever any overlap?
When I first started in daytime television, there were pretty definitive lines. The producer was there's an executive producer who oversees everything. Primarily, it's the budget, trying to stay on budget. Working, usually it was a network, and the network or Procter and Gamble was supplying the budget. So it's staying on budget. The executive producers then are responsible for that, but also involved in all casting, involved in working with the actors, wide range of things, but basically responsible for the whole show. And then the line producer, which I was in the soaps that I worked on, you're in the control room. There's the director in front of you, as well as a team of the lighting directors there, the production assistant, associate director, as we're putting basically taping the show. The associate director's making notes for the edit, so it will be sent down to an edit room and has to be pieced together. The PA's timing scenes, and okay, the show's running long, we better take cuts. Let's take cuts so we don't shoot stuff we're not going to need. And lighting director obviously saying, oops, you set lights up, but now we've changed position slightly. We need to change the lights. It's very much hurry up and solve the problem right now. Line producing is definitely problem solving. Keeping the day going. Sometimes the actors come in and are confused, or they don't really want to say a particular line, so it might be involved. Maybe I can answer it, or maybe I need to call the writer and script editor and speak to them about it. So it's a creative position. It's a support position. I always felt I'm the extra pair of eyes for the director in the control room. He's focused on all his shots, and I'm like, oh, no, I see the boom coming in. So keeping that extra pair of eyes, and then also just knowing the story, because I've probably read material 3 to 4 weeks ahead in outline, and he may not have read it all. He's focused on his show today or her show today. So I'm helpful in that way too. Oh no, this is going to be really important. So make sure we capture this person's reaction to the scene. We're going to flash back to it in the future. It basically very creative. What happens scheduling wise usually is if I'm in the control room on day one, then day two I'm in the edit room putting a show together. The editor has put it together, and then I'll make decisions. Okay, that's great, but we still need to trim something, or we really want to end on that character, not that character. And then it was a rotation. So usually we had 2 line producers on every show I was on. The big change, like when I began to meet people and say night prime time, was that what they shifted to is the writer has also become a producer. So in a primetime show, anything from classic Law and Order to Modern Family, the executive producer is also a writer. So basically, an individual writer has done episode 25. They're going to go to the set that day and they're going to check everything. They're going to go to the art department, make sure all the sets are what they visualized when they wrote the scene. They check in, they read it through with the actors. So basically, they're dated for that particular episode. They're kind of acting as the producer and making sure everything goes well. So that was a different for me. So daytime, it was defined a little differently. Nighttime, and most of the shows now you find is that the writers have become producers. So I think it's because producers had the final say and the writers wanted to have say because they've created the story. So that is a big difference today, that you've got writers who are also producers. There are definitely producers who are non-writers, but a great number of them were the original script writer, story writer, and then became producers. And then film, producers, a large part of it is getting the money to do the film, as opposed to a series you've already got it from the network or the service or where already set in place. Movie producers are often the money makers. They are also maybe the ones who bring a name director to the project or a name actor to the project. So the roles are a little different depending which aspect of the industry you're in. With a quick overview.
That's wonderful. And thank you for that, explanation of everything. I mean, it definitely makes sense for the writers to overlap with the role of producer nowadays, because like you said, having that closeness to the product they created, if they, ideally they should have the final say in that case. But no, definitely. I mean, for the production side of things, I think it ultimately can be summarized as you're just staying one step ahead of everybody, essentially, because you have to know everything that's going on and everything that has to go on in the next couple of days and next couple of weeks. You're always keeping that, eye beyond what's physically in your space at this time, what you need to be looking forward to.
Well, I remember Jonathan saying it, and that holds true today, all these years later. He studied at Yale School of Drama. His MFA was in directing. Because he had been acting for a number of years at that point, but now was thinking about maybe directing. He said as a directing student, you had to understand light plots and you had to understand sets and how they were designed. Every aspect, costumes, every aspect. So you learned how to communicate as a director with the set designer, with the lighting designer on their terms. And so I think that's true again for a theater student today. Yes, I'm acting. No, learn about all those other departments so that you understand the work that goes into that, so that you don't come in and just say, I hate this costume, I'm not wearing it. It's like, wait a minute. A lot of work has gone into that choice. And we're not here to argue that. So it is really important to understand all aspects of production, whether you're the actor or the director, producer.
Definitely, especially with daytime television where you barely have time to argue that. It's like, just get in the costume, we got to go.
Right, hurry up, got to get the day done.
Exactly. What have you found to be some of the more challenging moments of your work, whether it was making a particular story come together or even technical production challenges or just any kind of element that you've found, to be more challenging?
Well, I mean, sometimes certain actors were challenging. And I respect the artist. They're the ones that are in front of the camera and they have process to create this character. So sometimes there's temperamental people that come into play. And I found it's stay level and calm. And it brings the situation down. Because when the actors are really, really getting emotional, it doesn't help to add to the fire, so to speak, is to bring it down. So that's sort of just a general comment. I mean, in my mind, I'm flashing to particular moments, but we don't need to go into those. I mean, and then a total shift of gears, working on the documentary. I was working in Los Angeles with an editor who then had to leave the project, and then COVID hit. And so I ended up getting an editor all the way across the country, New Jersey. And the wonderful thing was he didn't know Dark Shadows or Jonathan. So he could be an objective eye when I sometimes, well, I really, really want to have this moment. And he would say, well, do you really need that? Yeah, I don't think and so
That's cool.
that was super helpful. And I have, again, have not done a documentary. And when you look at all this footage and you've really got to try to keep it tight and tell your story, super helpful to have someone who has the objective eye to watch and say, yeah, really think about this. Because the most important thing is to keep it understandable as you move along. And sometimes you might get wrapped up in the minutia of a story, and it doesn't help the audience.
Definitely. I'm sure it's overwhelming to put something like that together, because it's not just a storyline of a character or a particular time in a character's life. I mean, this is an entire person's entire life that you're trying to basically summarize into neat storytelling, 2 hours or less kind of thing. So I'm sure gathering all that footage and then just looking at it, it's definitely helpful to have multiple eyes being like, okay, we need this, we don't need this, put this here.
Yeah. And the very wise words that I was given at the beginning of the process were, know the story you want to tell and move forward. But because the budget was tight, it was a very skeleton crew. I had myself and my editor, pretty much for the most part. And then when we actually went on video shoots, I, of course, had terrific videographers and audio people and lighting people. But they were different every place I went, because I shot 2 different locations in Ontario, New York City, Memphis, Tennessee, Los Angeles. And rather than bring a crew, you hire locals. As a matter of fact, when I first trip to Canada, my crew was entirely women. My videographer, lighting, audio, and makeup and hair. And so I was like, oh, this is fun. We have a whole team of women. They were terrific, though, across the board. All the ones I worked with, making creative, suggestions in terms of lighting or background. I just really just was so blessed to have so many terrific people helping in those shoots, because I, as I say, the first time. And it's different when you're like on a location. Anthony Zerbe suggested, when I spoke to him, he lives in Santa Barbara and shooting in the Mission in Santa Barbara. So when I went to scout, I realized what he was talking about, the front of it. Well, there's a beautiful fountain. However, it's where all the people come in and the tour buses drive up. And I said, no, this is too noisy. So went inside, and they graciously, of course, they're used to film crews coming, suggested a very quiet courtyard, beautiful statue, in such a lovely setting to do that. And the day that Anthony Zerbe arrived for the interview, and I said, we're going inside. He goes, oh, I've never been inside. And I thought when he had suggested it, it was a regular visiting spot. He'd only ever been outside. So it was kind of a funny little story.
That's great. I've always kind of wondered how location scouting and things like that take place, because sometimes when you find out that the front of a house of a sitcom that you love, or an iconic movie spot or something like that, ends up being just kind of an average ordinary house that's just belongs to somebody and somebody's living there now. It's like, how did that initially happen? Did they approach the people who lived in the house at the time and say, hey, can we use the front of your house because we like it? I mean, how does that kind of thing come together?
Well, or maybe the executive producer knows the family and says, hey, we want to shoot the outside of your house. But,
that
generally,
too, of course.
Generally there are places, there's registries of places that they're willing to have people come to their house and shoot inside or outside. It's in most of the places, like my Canada. So I went on a survey first to figure out which locations, again, looking at what about sound and what would be costs involved. And I have to say, Canadians are really lovely people, and they don't charge you a lot of money. Unlike New York City, when I spoke to a particular location and they wanted $2,000 for us to shoot for an hour and a half, I said, no, I can't afford that on my budget. But it was super helpful to, New York City, I knew the places, I knew where I wanted to go. Canada I didn't. So that was a survey was required there. Memphis, I was only interviewing one person, and I had already spoken to a theater. It said we could shoot inside. And when I got there, they had a play going on. And the videographer said, I think that background's too busy for this play. It was the one that's about ABBA. So it was a lot of colorful. And so he said, let's turn it around. So now you see the seats and the lights in the auditorium, and then they worked great. And then again, LA, I saw new locations, although Santa Barbara Mission, I went to look at it in advance. It's helpful to scout, so then you try to problem solve in advance, so that day you don't get it and realize, oh no, we can't shoot here, the helicopters are going overhead. But also places like Mission, they have had filming there before, so they can also make suggestions. But again, that's part of the pre-production. That's important, getting all that type of work done.
Definitely. And it's all situational to really just figure out what you need and what's going to work. And then, of course, problem solving to figure out something else if plan A doesn't work.
Right. And, you know, sometimes people are very willing to let you use their home. Other times there's, you know, theaters. So it's basically, I think you make your list of what you hope will work and then see if physically around it, sound and will work. And then, of course, you know, if it's in the budget.
Of course. On another separate note, I'm curious if you have some of your favorite or more memorable storylines from anything you've worked on, whether it was, you know, one of Jonathan's one-man shows or one of the many soap operas you produced, anything that really stuck with you is, wow, I'm so glad we did that, or I feel really proud of that particular time.
Well, certainly when we told stories that impact people in their everyday lives, sadly, like breast cancer. And this was a number of years ago. I think several soaps had handled this, but I was on Guiding Light when they had the character of Lillian Raines, played by actress Tina Sloan, breast cancer, and basically went through the whole process, showed her going in and having a mammogram, her getting the news, how is she going to tell loved ones. And I recall this too, Tina got so many fan letters about thank you for this, because I went in now to get a test. I've been putting it off, found out that I have breast cancer, or I've learned so much I didn't know. So the impact of a true to life story stayed with me over the years. And hers is one I really remember, particularly because I talked to Tina a lot about it. So also too, it's your life and death. You know, they've had situations, characters with Alzheimer's, which they did, of course, a few years ago in General Hospital. I was on another show, but you just feel that you are as much as we're entertainment, of course, daytime. It's an opportunity to help people as well, give them information in a form that is that they're very at home watching every day, and they feel they know the characters, and oh my, somebody I know, oh, that's like me, and now I'm going through this. So that certainly, I think, was always the storylines that I love the most over the years. You know, we all know that, you know, romance and some fantasy, but it's those stories, I think, that touch the heart that I really remember the most. And then in terms of Jonathan, I mean, to me, he was such a mentor to young people. And I really wanted to get that point across, you know, that he was generous and always was grateful to his fans, and always would appear at fan conventions to chat with them, spend hours talking, signing autographs, photos, because he said, you know, I love my audience. I couldn't be an actor without an audience. And he appreciated that. And I wanted to make sure I got that across to people. Not just that, yes, he was an amazing actor. Here's his career on the stage doing Shakespeare and a number of other shows, but who he was as a person, you know, the heart of the man, so to speak.
That's wonderful. And ultimately, it comes back to the people behind the story, the people behind the characters and everything. I think that particular story about the guiding light and breast cancer, that's also really impactful because at the time, if I'm not mistaken, I believe it was the early mid-90s that you were working on Guiding Light, and it wasn't as common for breast cancer or cancer in general to be spoken about or shown openly. You know, nowadays there's a lot of, you know, thankfully there's a lot of, you know, advocates and awareness and, you know, understanding, you know, what needs to be done and get checked and prevention and all that kind of stuff. But I feel like, you know, there was definitely a time, especially in the past, where it was something to be hidden, something to be ashamed of, something of, oh, you know, I don't even want to acknowledge that this is a thing. So especially for something like daytime television, coming into people's homes, like we were saying, characters they feel like they know, to really show that those challenges and those struggles in real time, essentially.
I mean, they had some amazing head writers when soaps were starting, 60s, 70s, 80s, Agnes Nixon, wonderful Doug Marlin, Bill Bell created Young and Restless, who really knew how to tell stories. It was so impactful. I think one of the first stories they had on All My Children was about a young man going to the Vietnam War. They also dealt with abortion on All My Children. So I think they were very much aware of the importance of social issues, but incorporating them into a story so they were palatable to the network, I suppose, and yet could make a deep connection with the audience, and then kept the people watching the shows.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, that palatable to the network, that's a key word there as well. I feel like that everyone who's done TV and even, film as well, whether if it's not a network, then the production company or the distributor, whoever you're working with is, sometimes there may be more intense stories that people want to tell that they have to pull it back a little, make it a little more audience friendly sometimes.
Yeah, you reminded me of a moment. There's another wonderful head writer, for years worked on Another World. His name was Harding, nicknamed Pete LeMay. And I was working on Another World, and he was asked to be a consultant. He was actually looking for some work. He'd retired, but his wife had passed away, and I think he wanted to keep himself busy. And he was asked to come in and consult because Another World was maybe perhaps dipping in the ratings, and it was time to see if he might have some input. And I was sitting in the room, and the head writer was there, and the network representative, the executive producer, and the network woman was having a problem with the storyline because basically, this very heroic man who was married was going to sleep with another woman, and they were really questioning why this would happen. And Harding Pete LeMay just deadlined right at the executive and said, "Because it's good drama." And there was silence in the room. We thought, yes, this is a head writer, and he knows how to tell a good story. It was a powerful moment, and they told the storyline. And that year, the actors were nominated involved in that story, and one of them won a daytime Emmy for the performance. So yeah, it was pretty amazing moment I can recall.
That's funny. I mean, it's like, fair enough. What are you going to say to that response? It's good drama. It's not something you'd want to hear, happening to your life or your friend's life or anything like that. But on the TV characters, you're like, oh my God, this is fascinating. You get into the story, kind of thing. That's definitely good drama at the end of the day.
Right.
That's great. Also, mentioning the different soap operas that you've worked on, I'm curious as well how that kind of transition from one to another show in general goes, but also went for you, because like you said, there's that consistency of having a year-round production. That you're coming back, next month, next season, next year, whatever it may be. But what would be, what would prompt the end of working on one show and the start of the next for you?
Well, usually what happened is the executive producer, who I worked for a number of years with, Jill Farron Phelps, and she would leave one show and then often call me and say, "Would you like to come work at this show?" And I'm like, "Yes," because I love working with her as a boss, extremely talented, but also really kind to her employees. And it was a wonderful working relationship I had with her. So when I would go to a new show, I would certainly start to watch it and read a little bit, but you couldn't possibly, if a show's been on already 30 years, you can't go back and read all the endless Bible, so to speak, or the daily outlines. It's just too much. You got to just figure out who all the characters are in the moment and where they are in the story. And I mean, in some ways, there's sort of mechanics to all of this in terms of scheduling. The deadline of first it's an outline, then it becomes a script. And so I understood the structure of how that worked. It's just now the players are different, faces are different, designers are different. But I understand the process and the workload for all of them. And so I'm just coming in and I'm like, all right, this is what's happening right now, and let's problem solve and let's get things going. So it was really a pretty easy flow from one show to another, I found for myself. They definitely, again, as I mentioned, they're different personalities, and you sort of have to learn how to work with people. They've been there a long time. They know their character inside and out. And then when the writer suddenly is a new writer who maybe doesn't know all the history, throws something, they can balk and like, wait a minute, let me think about that. But in life, it's so interesting because you might think you're going to behave a certain way, but you've never been in that situation. Then you suddenly are. And am I going to behave the way I thought I would? Or is that am I going to behave differently? So that's what I used to say, it's just something you've never done before. So maybe you wouldn't act the way you thought you would. So actors eventually, this is what's on the page. This is the story. You can't change the story. They tweak lines, of course, for them, but yeah, it's part of the process. And I enjoyed that. And some days actors are having a hard time. Also, something maybe in their life is impacting them. So they're having a hard day. It's just try to be supportive and understanding. And I think you just got to get the script done, the day done.
Definitely. I think that also kind of distinguishes the fiction writing versus the documentary writing, because just in the sense of, the fiction writing, it's maybe adapting the character, realizing, okay, these are new situations, or we have to figure this out, like you were just saying. But with the documentary, that truly is the story. That story is the story. There's no changing it, because that was a person's life, and there's really, the irrefutable facts that you have to include, and there's no tweaking the script when it comes to a person's life, essentially.
Yes, it's telling the facts, but what's interesting is that, particularly going over different interviews, whether in print or on video, there's pieces of information that get a little misconstrued, misrepresented. When I worked with Jonathan, he would have an interview while he was doing his one-man show, say in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and suddenly there's an article that comes out, an interview, and they're focusing more on Dark Shadows, and they're not getting the story of the one-man show enough, or Jonathan, who could talk, who was a great storyteller. They might not have thoroughly listened, and they take a sentence out of context. And now it's like, well, no, that's not what he intended, but it's not clear because they didn't take a full quote. So having worked with him, I knew what the story was of his, certainly, his years during his one-man show. I learned a lot about the Dark Shadows period. And he told a lot of stories when we spent time together about his family, some humorous stories. So I found what I needed to do sometimes was, I felt, sort of correct certain pieces that had gotten out there wrongly in the press. One was that some people said, well, he didn't want to play Barnabas anymore. He was glad the series was ending. It's like he really always enjoyed playing Barnabas. So there were certain things I felt obligated to make sure it was clear, and hopefully I could find it in his words. Whether again I have a video of him or something that he's written that I could have narration for. So I felt a responsibility, in addition to, yes, those facts, but certainly correcting some misinformation along the way too.
Well, that just shows you were the right person for the job then, in that case. Definitely. No, I think you did a wonderful job with the documentary. Like I said, I've been raving about it since we started this interview, but I think it's definitely a beautiful piece of work, and I congratulate you on the release of that documentary. So everyone definitely check out the Dark Shadows and Beyond, the Jonathan Frid story. I want to kind of I'm overwhelmed with the beautiful interview that I've just had with you, because you have so much insight and knowledge and wisdom that I appreciate you sharing all that with me. So just to wrap things up, I'd like to ask if you have any current or upcoming projects to share.
Oh, thanks, Chelsea. I appreciate those lovely words. I don't currently have a project. I have contemplated doing another documentary. I've spoken to another documentary producer who would like to work together, throwing around ideas, nothing set. So I'm right now just enjoying still promoting the documentary. As you mentioned, it came out in October 2021, and then the year of 2022 was submitting to festivals, and it was great to get many awards and nominated for Daytime Emmy and winning a Telly Award. In 23, this year has been, okay, what would I like to do next? And thinking about it. And it will have to be definitely something that I feel passionate about. And we'll see. We'll see what happens with that. But I certainly, I learned a great deal about documentary producing, and I hope to be able to apply that to another project.
That's wonderful. Well, congratulations again on the release. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. This has been wonderful.
Thank you, Chelsea. It's a delight to be here. And again, if people are looking to watch the documentary, it's on a number of streaming services. They can go to the website at jonathanfrid.org. There are links to watch it on different services, whether to rent it or to see it free with ads. course, I don't particularly like ads because it wasn't designed for ads, but I prefer people watching it straight through. But however they watch it, it's just thrilled for people to watch it. And that's what I keep doing with social media too, telling people it's there, because it is really hard for any producer today, because there are so many productions out there, to get attention, get the word out for people to watch it. And that's why doing a lovely show like this with you, Chelsea, helps promote Dark Shadows and Beyond, the Jonathan Frid Story, to get more people to watch it.
Absolutely. And we will definitely do our best to get more people to watch it, get the message out there for sure, because it is a wonderful production from a wonderful person. So thank you again, Mary.
Thank you so much, Chelsea.